place. So,
got a hand up?
Sorry.
Dr. Weidman?
Yes. It's not just the data that has an issue. It's a lot of the algorithms that are being applied in data science. And I'm actually working with the head of data for NCI, and we're putting together a program whereby we're making recommendations for how to evaluate new algorithms with standardized test data, where we know what the program gaps and challenges are, and basically recommending the new algorithms have to be tested against data where we know what the problems are before we can start to trust them finding problems that we don't know exist. And I think we need to keep that in mind. It's not just the data. The data will always have problems. There'll never be perfect data, but we need to understand how the algorithms will perform.
no, that's an extremely important point, and I think it speaks to, what are the operating characteristics of being able to make a particular inference or a particular prediction, for that matter, and it flows from, the relatively recent papers from Google about data cascade failures. So it's testing those scenarios, but also bringing in leveraging domain area expertise that informs how to correct the algorithms or how to guide the algorithm. I think, and some of that is that adaptive feedback with cases.
One other example I'll give in regards to real world evidence is the Critical Path Institute's International Neonatal Consortium. Dr. John Davis gave a little talk from there yesterday. The INC is a multi-stakeholder group dedicated to advancing regulatory science and drug development in neonates. And one of the big barriers to conducting clinical trials in the NICU is lack of universally accepted definitions for adverse events. And something as simple as universally accepted normal ranges for lab values is a barrier. So the data team at Critical Path Institute is working with the INC, and for the first time ever, we have multiple different pharmaceutical companies putting in neonatal data, multiple academic EHRs putting in neonatal data, and some of the big external data sets like Vaughan. And the Critical Path Institute is harmonizing all of that laboratory data to develop universal normal, accepted normal ranges for things as simple as sodium and potassium that can be used prospectively in neonatal clinical trials. So and it'll be, I don't know, millions of neonates that create that data set. In addition, that same data set is going to be used to develop a natural history model for bronchopulmonary dysplasia. So there's no drugs FDA approved for the treatment of BPD, which is a common disease in neonates. And the pharmaceutical industry, multiple stakeholders basically said a huge barrier to designing clinical trials is we don't understand the natural history of this disease based on how it's currently treated. So we don't understand at all how a control arm will behave in order to power a study or design a study. So we're using, the Royal We, INC, is using this real world data to create a natural history model that can be used for clinical trial design for this neonatal disease process. So that's another example of, I think, really great use of real world data for a targeted barrier in drug development.
Hey Tamara, this is a really good comment where I think everybody both in the clinical world and the informatics world, really want to know the normal range of lab tests, which is I think it's kind of everybody wants to have it. As a matter of fact, can I ask a kind of a follow-up question? Some disease they may need maybe it's a combination of several tests to really make a decision of particular disease. Would this be relevant in that effort as well?
So yes, so this, I don't know all the details, but I know that this natural history model will incorporate like a range of risk factors, different treatment modalities that these neonates encounter in the course of their routine care in the NICU, radiographic information, lab information, kind of like, treatment ventilator information. And so, it won't be one line because there's such a variable trajectory in the development and evolution of BPD, but it will at least be an average line with a quantifiable variability around it. And so I think that's the goal, is to create this natural history model that can be used to understand the current natural history so that you can design clinical trials. And my understanding is that they're taking into account in that natural history model all kind of clinical variables and treatment variables and outcomes.
So this kind of a model is, very popular in industry when they do a new drug planning, and it's called just a patient journey. So they try to put the patient journey together, collect all this information, and then put it forth so that they understand what are the potential gaps to the healthcare system, that they would need to address or think about as they are planning to put a product on the market. So they do similar exercises when they're trying to work a product to the finish line. Patient journeys.
We actually look at this a little differently. So in this case, you're looking at patients with BPD and trying to come up with the average path to get to BPD. We look at a data-driven model to say, what are the paths of patients that are common, and do they actually reflect subtypes of BPD that maybe should be managed differently and at different stages? So we use a data-driven model rather than a goal-driven model. And we find that that is a general approach. And the other thing is, while it's obviously medicine uses a lot of what we call composite scores, where we're adding together scores in a number of different clinical profiles. And what we find is you may have a normal distribution for one parameter and for another parameter, but these look very different. Say you have 8 different clinical measurements. It looks very different when you plot it in 8-dimensional space to understand how those variables may shift very differently when they're in combination with other variables, not looked at individually. And that's a typical level of complexity that obviously physicians don't always have the training or experience to look at, but is probably a lot more critical to understand the complexity of what the patient's presenting and can be handled mathematically. That's the kind of modeling that we've been involved in.
Great. We have come to the end of our session today. I want to thank our panelists. We really appreciate your expertise and your thoughts today. And thank you so much for our attendees for asking such great questions and for engaging us into such an important conversation. So right now we're going to move to Dr. Quinney for some closing remarks today.